Good day, fish tankers. Welcome back. Now, have any one of you ever wanted a wet pet? Now, Lulu here is a very nice pet, but she is a dry pet, aren't you, Lulu? You don't like water, huh, Lulu? Lulu doesn't like water. But can you believe it that you've got some fish that can almost have dog-like characteristics? Not like Lulu here, whose back is back in shape, and she's doing well. Thank you for asking, those that did. And you can get fish that's got a bit of personality, that's got a bit of intelligence, believe it or not, that reacts to you when you are in the room, and they have their own personalities, and they're always there begging for food that other fish do as well, but they're more clever in the way they go about fish. And they are sometimes also fish that have to stay on their own, because mostly they can be predatory or aggressive. Now, those are what we call wet pets. Are you interested to learn more about them? I've got a list of a top 5 wet pets. Personality fish, wet pets. Here is my top 5 list, not necessarily in order of preference. I just picked 5 that I've kept and that I liked, and this is what I think. Now, coming in at number 5 is actually my favorite, and that is the quintessential wet pet, and that's of course a member of a cichlid family. I'm talking about the Oscar. Now, Oscars, when you see them in the shop as babies, they look adorable with those googly eyes. They're always hungry, begging for food. They've got lots of personality, but they do grow, and they do grow rapidly. Never mind what size tank you have. They grow quickly, quicker than any other fish that I've had. And those small juvenile Oscars quickly become big behemoth of fishes. So you have to have a big tank to keep Oscars. Now, how big is big? You've got to remember an Oscar reaches about 30 centimeters, 1 foot, and I've seen individuals that reach more than that, from the tip of their nose to the base of their tail, and you've got to add for the tail as well. But they're very girthy fish. They are big blocks, and they're like bulldogs, and they're very, very solid. So back when I was a student, I had Oscars. I really miss them. They got the greatest personality. They recognize their individual owners. When I walked to my flat and they could see me walking past the front window, they already come to the front of a tank, and by the time I'm in the apartment, they're splashing around water there in their tank. And if it was somebody else, they wouldn't do it. They would just sit there at the back of a tank and sort of watch, okay, who is this? Now, I kept those 2 Oscars in a 300-liter aquarium, and they lived for years, but I won't recommend it. A 300-liter aquarium, that's 4-foot high aquarium, that's okay for a single Oscar, a wet pet, but more than that, like the 2 that I've had, they lived for years and all of it, but I won't recommend that. That's too small for them. Back then we did what we knew best. That was the recommended size. I didn't know better, but I did water changes until my back broke. About a 60% water change twice a week is what those Oscars needed. So 300 liters, a 4-foot tall or 75-gallon tank is okay for a single Oscar. It's a bare minimum, but I would say about 5 foot, 1.5 meters by 2 foot by 2 foot by 60 by 60 centimeters, and that is the sweet spot if you want to have a pair of Oscars and maybe 1 or 2 other fish. I've got a bucket list tank, and that's there on that YouTube channel, Cichlid Bros. I've got a 180-gallon tank. That's a 6 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot community of South and Central American cichlids, and there's a big Oscar there. That's the centerpiece of that tank. That's my bucket list tank. If I ever have the space for something like that, I would like to have a couple of Oscars again in a tank like that, maybe with a few deacons and a big Royal Penarch pleco and my clown nose or something like that. But if you want to keep Oscars in a community tank of other big fish, you're going to need a tank that's that sort of proportion. If you're just going to keep the Oscars, just for 2 of them, then I would say go for a 5-foot tank. That's 5 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. That's the sweet spot. If you're just going to keep a single pet, that 75 gallons, 300 liters is the absolute minimum. I would go bigger than that. It's just going to make it easier on you, and because less maintenance, because they are messy fish, big poop, lots of waste. What do they eat? The usual cichlid fare: There's all sorts of pellets for these monster cichlids available now. There's a variety. I would suggest feed them a variety. Back in my day we had Tetra Doraemon. Now it's Ikari that mostly make these foods, but also feed them a variety. What I would suggest, I used to feed my Oscars all sorts of insects that I could catch, even cockroaches, crickets, but nowadays with the reptile keeping being so big and all the big pet stores, you get these already cultured crickets in these little containers. I would buy those for my Oscars if I had them today, and I'd feed them those as well. And also things like tilapia, the bigger frozen food like lance fish, they would enjoy all of that food as well. For the rest, they are unfussy. The normal sort of water parameters, it can be soft and acidic, it can be alkaline, as long as it's not something extreme, they'll be fine with that, but they need good water quality. So for that you need a big tank, and you also need big filters, like a canister filter and then something else. I kept mine with a big canister filter. There's also an internal power filter just to polish the water and keep it looking decent. So I would choose a combination of a canister filter and perhaps a big hang-on back filter. You might get away with 2 of the biggest hang-on back filters, but big fish equals big filtration. And to keep the water parameters, their nitrates lower, you're going to have to perform some big water changes. I would say 50% weekly, unless you've got some other way of getting rid of the nitrates. They are not the friendliest fish with plants. It's never worked out for me. I just use hardscape. And when you do, use big Bupani logs rather, or rocks that are rounded. Don't put in sharp hardscape, because sometimes an Oscar can injure an eye or get a cut or injure himself, because sometimes, like all fish, they get startled and they maybe make a quick move and they bang themselves against something. So be aware of that. Don't have sharp edges in your hardscape. So that's for Oscar. That's a fish that can give you years and years of enjoyment. To me, it's still the ultimate personality fish. But coming in at number 4 is something for aquarists that wants a bit more of a challenge, and that is the green spotted puffer. A challenge because, once again, it's a wet pet. It's a fish that is more aggressive than an Oscar. You can try and keep 2 of them together, but you have to introduce them together, and when they are small, let them grow up together, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You have to separate them with a separator, a divider, or rehouse one of them. But if you want to skip all of that, I would say just get 1. And the other challenge is they are a brackish water fish. When they're small, you sometimes get them in the pet shops in fresh water, but they don't do well. Inevitably they get fungus and so on. They don't do well. They can live in full marine water as well. Where is the sweet spot for brackish water? You'll get a variety of answers, and they'll say the salinity needs to be anywhere between 1.008 and 1.018. Marine water usually being between 1.021 and 1.022. What I have found in the days we had them there in the shop, and they are very personable fish, but what I did back in those days, the formula that worked for me, a 20 litre or a 5-gallon bucket, and you chuck in 400 grams of salt in that, and preferably marine salt, the stuff you use to mix seawater. But I'm going to be honest with you, we used aquarium salt, normal coarse aquarium salt, 400 grams of that in a 20 litre bucket, and that's a ratio that we used, and it worked, and the puffer was healthy and happy. But probably it's safer to use marine salt. There might be some minerals missing, although that did work for us. And it needs a big tank. I would say a 4-foot 200 litre tank, because even though they seldom get as big as an Oscar, they're also messy fish because they eat protein, and that's the other challenge. Besides the fact that you also need big filtration for these, they are not going to eat any dried food. I've seldom seen them do it. They like frozen food if you don't have live food, so you can feed them krill, lance fish, that sort of thing. And also they love snails, so if you have a supply of snails, it's advisable to culture them somewhere in a separate little tank. Ram's-horn snails, bladder snails, they'll eat all those snails. And it's essential that they get these snails with the shells, because they have beaks. And if they don't get it, there's nothing to wear down their beaks, and they get these teeth, actually in actual fact beaks, get bigger and bigger until we eventually can't eat. So you have to feed them snails, or another alternative these days, I see Ocean Nutrition makes little mussels on the half shell, and you can feed them those as well, because that'll help to grind their teeth down. Even the marine mussels that you get from the seafood deli, that'll work as well as the normal shrimp that you buy at the seafood deli. That'll be fine for the Oscars as well, but it'll also be fine especially for your green spotted puffer. So that's it with a puffer, 200 litre tank, proper filtration, brackish water, and also you need to buffer that pH. So on the substrate I would put some crushed coral or any marine or substrate that's usually used for marine fishes to buffer the pH, or for Malawi fishes to keep the pH up. Any of those Malawi marine substrates or crushed coral, something that puts calcium in the water on the bottom. And as I've said, we used 400 grams of sand in a 20 litre bucket. That's the ratio that we use to mix the water, and when we just add those buckets to the aquarium, and it did well with that. But the salinity somewhere between 1.008 and 1.018 if you have a hydrometer, and I think you should get one. So that is something if you want to challenge, something completely different, the green spotted puffer. Now coming in at number 3, we've got another cichlid, and they're all the rage these days, and I'm talking about the flowerhorn cichlid. Some people love them, some people hate them, because they are a hybrid of several different fish together. I think there's a Vaya in it, and maybe a Midas or a red devil and something else. I'm not sure. You can go and read up on it, but I think it's also a secret that they keep there in the East. But they are very colorful cichlids, and as cichlids do, the males develop this big nuchal hump, but in the flowerhorn it's much more pronounced, that nuchal hump. And even the females have a smaller nuchal hump. So they've developed this huge nuchal hump, and it's called a KOK. I'm going to spell it out. It's pronounced like a synonym for a rooster, and I'm going to do that because of the YouTube police. But they have a big nuchal hump, and they have the bright colors, and you feed them exactly the same as you feed an Oscar. Cichlid pellets, maybe some shrimp, maybe some crickets. And the other thing about them, water parameters, not fussy. Most of it of a normal aquarium water parameters will do. They need big filtration. Now, officially they can grow with very biggest one, as big as an Oscar, or some would say even bigger, but I haven't seen those outsized individuals here in South Africa. Maybe we get the runs of a litter. They seem to me always quite a bit smaller than an Oscar. So I would think a 200 litre tank for a single one would be fine. You can't keep them together because they're super aggressive. They will eventually kill each other. They have different personalities like all these wet pets do, and you get individuals that are not quite as aggressive. There's a guy in one of our fish groups, Shaw. His flowerhorn, Mr. Knucklehead, is almost a celebrity or mascot in its own right, and that one is in a community with other fish in it, and even a planted tank, and he doesn't destroy anything. But that's the exception to the rule. Don't bargain on that. Mostly with flowerhorn, it's going to be also a true wet pet. It's going to be on its own in a tank, and it's probably going to, the ones that I've seen that my friends had, they even messed up the hardscape, threw the gravel around, moved logs around, and they ended up just being in a tank on their own. But I would give it a substrate. I don't like bare tanks. I'll put in some sort of a substrate there of pebbles, big filters, and smooth decorations if you're going to put any of them in, and big filters as well. And the one thing about a flowerhorn cichlid that's different than say an Oscar, except for the fact that they're more aggressive, they're definitely more aggressive, is that they like it warmer. They like discus temperature. So keep the water at 29 degrees Celsius. I would say that is the sweet spot. Discus temperature somewhere between, no lower than 27, but between 27 and 30. I would say 29, that's where I think they do the best at. So that is the flowerhorn cichlid at number 3. Now he said, Drux, all these wet pets are huge. We don't have the money or the space for these big aquariums to get a green spotted puffer, flowerhorn, never mind an Oscar. Yes, there are wet pets that can go in small aquariums, and one of them is one that we all know, and that is the Siamese fighter, or the beta as it's called these days. And a single male makes a wonderful pet. There's one here over my shoulder. They can go in communities, but the males definitely cannot go together unless you have a huge tank full of plants and they can't see each other. And sometimes they have a sorority of females, but that is also touch and go. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the female has almost all the personality of a male, and they've got all the colors nowadays. So they also make for a good wet pet, and they can live in much smaller tanks. I think anywhere from 5 gallons to 15 gallons, 20 liters to 60 liters is the sweet spot. And you've got to avoid feeding them too much dry food. Use the beta pellets that's designed for them. With the dry food, with the normal aquarium plugs, if they overindulge on it, they get bloated, they get dropsy. So use that, and about twice a week, try and feed them some frozen food. Mine likes bloodworms, it keeps them regular, and do not overfeed, because they'll always be begging for food. So don't overfeed, and they like the water a little bit warmer. I would say 26, 27 degrees Celsius is where they do best. So that is the beta of a Siamese fighter fish. I've done a more extensive video on them. And then coming in at number 1 is a real nano fish, and I've got them in a 5-gallon tank, and that is also a puffer, but it's the pea puffer, or the Indian dwarf puffer as they're also sometimes called. And they're tiny, they're about the size of a peanut really, or a pea. They don't grow very big, they're tiny fish. So they eat the same thing as all other puffers. They're not going to eat dried food. I try to get mine on vibrobites, they won't. All they will eat is a mixture of brine shrimp and bloodworm. They eat that quite readily. Now and then I supplement it with a few drops of vitamins for fish. I'll put it up on the screen over the frozen food. But they live on that brine shrimp and bloodworm, and they also eat snails, I'm told, but mine are not interested in snails, but I do think they harass them. I tried to put a nerite snail in once or twice to help with the algae. The snail buries itself into the sand. So they definitely harass him, even though I've never seen them do it. So I moved the nerite snail. But they will eat smaller snails like ram's horn snails and the like. But they don't need snails like the bigger puffers, like the green spotted one does. You know, they don't have beaks like the bigger puffers that needs to be worn down. So they don't have that problem, which is a nice thing. They're not brackish water fish, they're a fully freshwater puffer. So they'll live in your normal aquarium parameters as long as it's good water quality. And usually they'll tell you a single pea puffer works well in a 5-gallon, a 20-liter tank, and then for a group of puffers you want more towards a 10 or 15-gallon tank. I've got a group of 4 little puffers in my 5-gallon that have been there for months now, and I don't have any problems. So maybe I'm just lucky, maybe they're all female males, maybe that'll change. So I'll keep a close eye on them. But they certainly don't need big tanks. They have different personalities. You might have a very aggressive one that's based on its own, but you want a little desktop tank like that. You're tired of the usual Siamese fighter, then a small pea puffer can be the ideal alternative. I think they're terrific little wet pets, and also they don't need a massive amount of filtration. Just a bubble up sponge filter or a small power filter that you can divert the flow onto one of the glass panes will work. They don't like a lot of flow, so be careful of that. They don't like huge amounts of flow. Well, that's it, guys. That's what I think my top 5 wet pets are. We've got the Oscar, we've got the green spotted puffer, the flower horn, the beta, and the pea puffer. Tell me, which wet pets do you like? Do you have experience of any of these fish like the Oscar or the flower horn? Have you ever kept a green spotted puffer? And until we see each other again, please give the channel a thumbs up. I always like to hear from you in the comment section. Please subscribe. And until we talk again, keep taking good care of those domestic denizens of the deep.